this is obviously a training on the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. We had more than 400 people register to attend this training, which is wonderful, and also I think very indicative of kind of the crisis that we're facing. And so we thank you all for being here. This is I'd say more than a training. This is kind of a call to action. This is our request that all of you pitch in helping to get your clients, your patients, the people that you're working with who might be eligible and in need of this program, help them get those applications in. There are designated approved providers who are set up to do these applications, and they are completely inundated. I'm sure that's no surprise to any of you that have kind of been experiencing this on the ground with the people that you work with. You know, that we're in a real crisis of impending evictions and people who are extremely behind on rent. So, you know, like I said, those programs are inundated. I heard at one point they were getting 1,000 calls a day. So we're really asking all of you to kind of help learn about this program, and to the extent that you can, help your clients apply, since those you know, designated approved providers are just not able to keep up with the demand. So this training is, there's kind of multiple components to it. It's for any kind of community provider to learn about the application, and as well as landlords to be able to apply, whether you're a supportive housing, affordable housing provider, or private landlord, how to do those applications and what's required as a landlord. So we're going to go through all of that. First, some housekeeping items. We have live transcripts enabled. So if you would like to enable or disable subtitles, you can do so by clicking the CC live transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a little screenshot for you to see exactly where to find it. You can you know, go into subtitle settings and change the size of the text, or view full transcript. So that is available to you for your accessibility needs. Please feel free to, as we go through this training, to put any questions you have into the chat box, any resources, comments. You know, we want this to be a place to share information and resources. So please do use that chat box, and, you know, see some of you introducing yourself. Please feel free to introduce yourself so we kind of know who's in the room. And then finally, towards the end of the event, we'll have an evaluation poll that will pop up. We really appreciate if you could fill that out so that we know how we can improve this, and just hear from you if this was beneficial. We also have an open-ended survey. That's another, we'll share the link. That's an opportunity for you to give more feedback. And in addition, let us know what other programming would be helpful to you, what other training topics. We're always doing trainings. So we really want to hear from you about what is most needed in your work. Next slide. So here's a quick look at the agenda. We will have Jordan Dubry from BronxWorks go over the eligibility criteria for this application for tenants and landlords. Then we will have Thomas Abbott from HPD go over some of the programs that they have available. And then at 2:30, we will have a large Q&A. So we want to leave plenty of time for your questions. So that's how things should run. And with that, I don't want to waste any more time. I'm going to hand it right over to Jordan.
Thank you, Bonnie. My name is Jordan Dubry. I'm an attorney with BronxWorks. So I'm a housing attorney. I approach things from a housing attorney tenant perspective. So let's just dive right in. So what is ERAP? So ERAP is the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. It's a temporary program to pay rental arrears. And it's right now the best and pretty much only answer that we have been given as far as what happens to pay off all of the arrears that have accumulated during the pandemic. So there is not just one ERAP program. Every state has their own program. In fact, almost every city with at least 200,000 people has some version of ERAP. But New York has one statewide program, and it's based on federal funds that have been allocated by the Department of Treasury, then sent on to the state, and then sent on to various entities within the state. The state as a whole, including, you know, the state of New York, city of New York, Various counties, various other cities within the state of New York have been allocated about $2.3 billion, which sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but there's also a big, big need. And, you know, the ERAP program is administered in the state by the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance in New York City, which is where I am and where a lot of folks on this call are. HRA is overseeing the implementation of ERAP, and HRA is contracted out outreach, education, and application assistance to a variety of community-based organizations in the Bronx. One is a consortium led by BronxWorks. I'm actually with BronxWorks, but there's several approved application assistance providers, but anybody, an individual applicant can do the application on their own. Landlords can do it. Various community-based organizations can do it. You don't have to be on any special list to do it. And like Bonnie said, we're getting literally 1,000 calls a day, and the appointment times are backed up quite a ways. So if you're with a community-based organization and you have a client, or if you're a landlord, you have a tenant and you want to make sure that they get their application in before, you know, potentially funds run out, you want to help them out with this. You want to make sure they get it in as quickly as possible. So if you're having additional questions about ERAP, there is a statewide hotline. It's 1-844-NY1-RENT or 1-844-691-7368. There's various extensions, one for tenant applicants, one for landlords, and one for community-based organizations. Also, nysrenthelp.otda.ny.gov is the actual website where you can do the application. The application is entirely online. There isn't a paper version, so you do it all through that website. So there are some eligibility criteria for ERAP. The basic breakdown is that the household has to have a household income at or below 80% AMI. That's the area median income, which I'll go more into in another slide. They have to experience a COVID-19 related financial hardship or have qualified for unemployment. And then these last two are kind of overlapping, but they have to have a rent obligation at their primary residence that's overdue, and a demonstrated risk of experiencing housing instability and homelessness. So, you know, BronxWorks is in the Bronx, so I just use the Bronx as an example. That's different for different counties, but 80% AMI, and if everyone would mute themselves, 80% AMI for a house. And so 66,850 for a household of one, for a household of four, 95,450. You know, obviously if you're in Westchester or somewhere upstate, it's going to be a different amount. So the AMI amounts are actually available online. They change every year, so make sure you get the one for the right year. So financial hardship, it has to be determined that on or after March 13th, 2020, which is kind of the magic date for the pandemic having started, at least in the eyes of the ERAP program. A member of the household has to have received unemployment benefits, experienced a reduction in income, or had an increase in costs due to the pandemic. We'll go into that a little bit more. The other part, the rent obligation, can just be shown by having rental arrears overdue at the current residence on or after March 13th, 2020. Housing instability, again, something that can be demonstrated by having those rental arrears owed on or after March 13th, 2020. One really fantastic thing about the ERAP program that separates it from a lot of other rental assistance programs that maybe you've heard of, like FEPS, City FEPS, something like that, is the ERAP program is immigration status blind. So your client, your patient, your tenant can be a US citizen, a permanent resident, undocumented. Their household can be a mix of all of those. It does not matter. They are eligible if they meet the eligibility criteria, regardless of their immigration status. So for the first 30 days, so this program started on June 1st, and for the first 30 days, there's a distinction as far as priority groups. They want to make sure the folks with what they've deemed to be the most at-risk population gets the highest priority. And so that's through the end of June. And then in July, it becomes first come, first serve as far as applicants. So the top priority group are folks that have a household income at or below 50% of the AMI. So to be eligible, you're at 80%, but to be the top category, you're 50% or lower. And you meet one of 7 factors, which I'll go into in the next slide. Second priority is just 50% AMI. Third priority is 80% AMI and one of those additional risk factors. And then fourth priority is that you have a household income at or below 80% AMI, and you just qualify for ERAP. So those 7 priority categories that, at least through the end of June, bump you up to the top of the list are folks who have been unemployed for at least 90 days. And this is any one person in the household. This is any one of these factors. It doesn't have to be multiple. It doesn't have to be all of them. Someone who's a veteran, someone who's currently experiencing domestic violence or is a victim of human trafficking, someone who has a pending eviction case, someone who lives in a mobile home, someone who lives in a community that was disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. There's actually a set of zip codes that are, and a set of neighborhoods that are deemed to be disproportionately impacted. And then also folks who live in a dwelling of 20 or fewer units. So they want to prioritize folks who have eviction cases, maybe smaller landlords. These additional risk factors get you higher up on the list. And one thing I should say right now is this program started on June 1st. Right now it's June 23rd. So, we're about 3 weeks into it. There are already 100,000 applications that have been submitted throughout the state. So, $2.3 billion is a lot, but there's already 100,000 applications. So there's a huge demand for this. So again, second priority, just the 50% AMI, third priority, 80% AMI, and those seven additional risk factors. And then fourth priority, just 80% AMI. And again, this is just for the month of June, the first 30 days. So what does ERAP actually do? If your client, if your tenant, if your patient applies for ERAP or you help them with it,
Okay. You should be able to join now. It says she's here.
And again, if everyone could.
No, it's really just increase the.
So the benefits of ERAP are that it will pay up to 12 months of rental arrears for rent accrued on or after March 13th, 2020. So it won't pay anything before that date, but up to 12 months after that date. Now, obviously, we're more than 12 months after March 2020 right now, but it'll pay 12 months of past rent, of rental arrears, and then it will actually pay up to 3 months of future arrears. So if the household is expected to spend 30% or more of their gross monthly income to pay for rent, they can even get future months of rent paid off by this program. Obviously it's subject to the funds still being available and to their application being approved. One other fantastic thing is up to 12 months of electric, gas, or heat utility arrears can be paid, again, for arrears that have accumulated on or after that magic March 13th, 2020 date. And to get utility arrears, there has to at least be some amount of rental arrears. It can literally be 1 month, it can be $1, but you can't just apply for utility arrears on its own. There has to be some amount of rental arrears as well. So who gets paid? So the payment does not go to the tenant. It goes directly to the landlord or property owner and utility company as well. So there is an application portion that the tenant fills out. There's also documents that the landlord has to upload. It's being done through an electronic payment system. So once that application gets submitted by the tenant, and whether they're doing that on their own, whether you're helping them out, the landlord will be notified. You do actually need to put in the landlord's contact information, so like an email, a phone number. And then the landlord will have we'll have to upload a W-9 and bank account information, and then whatever funds are approved will be submitted directly to the landlord. Obviously assuming that the application is approved. And this process is probably going to take a little while. Right now, the goal is for these ERAP applications to take about 4 to 6 weeks to be approved. And then after that, it's going to take a little while to disperse the funds. Now, if the landlord doesn't respond or fell off the face of the earth, or whatever reason they don't submit those documents, there's those funds from an approved application are going to be held for up to 180 days while all of that's getting figured out. And if at the end of that 180 days, the landlord still hasn't submitted the information, those funds are going to go back to the program. But it's going to be, if there is something in housing court later, we'll get into that in a future slide. So like I said, landlords have to submit a W-9, banking information. They have to certify the application on their end to just say that everything is accurate. There's a document that they have to show that, here's what the rent that was due, here's what the expected future rent is. Renters also have to submit a ton of documents, and this is quite time consuming. But they have to submit personal identification for every household member. That can be a driver's license, passport, EBT benefits issuance card, birth certificate, something like that. They have to submit the social security number of any household members who have one. Again, you can be undocumented and qualify for this. So you don't have to submit the social security number if you don't have one. You actually don't even have to submit a social security number. But you do need to show a social security number if you have one. And there's a portal to upload documents once you've submitted the application. Proof of rental amount, which can be a signed lease or rent receipts, canceled checks, something like that, and something showing that that the applicant has been living in that apartment, in that residence for the past month. That can be utility bills, school records, bank statements, something like that, even a piece of mail. Proof of income, that can be the 2020 taxes, that can be a pay stub from last month, it could be an unemployment benefits letter. If there is literally nothing, there can be what's called a self-attestation, the person literally writing down, I made this amount of income, gross income last month, last year, here's what the household made, and then that is actually acceptable. If applying for utility arrears, a copy of the gas or electric utility bill is also required. So the ERAP funds come with strings for the landlords. And that is that if you are a landlord and you are accepting these funds, you agree that it covers the full rental obligation for the time period covered by the payment of those funds. Now, that doesn't mean that it zeroes out everything. It could, and for a lot of folks it will. But if somebody owes 2 years in rental arrears, well, if 12 months of arrears are paid off by the ERAP program, that means that those 12 months of obligations get zeroed out. And whatever was before that time is still there, but those 12 months are gone. Also, any late fees on those rental arrears that were covered by on the actual arrears that were covered, any late fees associated with those months are gone. They can't be collected. And then after the funds are dispersed, for a full year after the disbursement of those funds, the monthly rental amount for that household is required to be frozen. It can't go up. It could go down, but it can't go up. And you can't a landlord can't bring a holdover eviction case for a full year after the funds are dispersed. So that's a specific type of eviction case for folks who are living there without a lease, or are there potentially without permission of the owner. There's other types of eviction cases, but you can't bring a holdover case. So what happens if a landlord looks at all this and says, I don't want to accept the ERAP funds? Well, it will actually be a defense in housing court if the ERAP application was approved, if the funds were, ready to go out to the landlord and the landlord refused them or didn't submit the information. In housing court, the fact that happened will actually be a defense to having to pay for those months that were approved. So it will be as if the landlord waived rent for whatever months were approved under the Ewrap application. So there's a lot of incentives to accept these ERAP funds if you're a landlord. So housing court impact, like I said, can't start. There can't be a holdover eviction case for a full year. Again, if the funds that are approved from ERAP are not accepted, then that rent obligation is waived for those months. And also, while an ERAP application is pending, whatever housing court case there is gets put on hold. Whatever eviction case I should specify gets put on hold while that application is pending. If there isn't one, a new one can't be filed. It's all just put on hold. So like I said, the ERAP application went live June 1st. There is that website that's up and running. It's completely an electronic application. There is no mailing in paper copies. There's nothing like that. As of today, there's over 100,000 applications that have been submitted statewide. I think as of last week, there were over 36,000 applications, I believe, that had been submitted in New York City alone. So the word is very much out. And that's even with the community-based organizations getting 1,000 calls a day and having a wait list of folks that are waiting. Sometimes I think some folks actually are booked up for about a full month, maybe longer, depending on the community-based organization. But even with all of that, there's already 100,000 applications that have been submitted. So again, time is of the essence if you're a tenant and you're trying to apply, or if you're trying to help your patient out, your client out, your tenant out. So what does the actual application look like? Well, this is the homepage, nysrenthelp.otda.ny.gov. And so if you're a landlord, you are actually required to create an account. You go to there, you go to this this homepage, and then you click on sign up, and you can select to register as a property owner. Tenants are not required to sign up, but it makes life a whole lot easier. And you should, if you're helping out a tenant with an application, you should have them register. And I'll get into how you can register as a tenant. If you're a CBO, you'll probably be helping out a tenant, so have the tenant register. But I'll run through the landlord process first. So once you click sign up, once you click register as a property owner, you put your first name and last name, which, obviously if it's an LLC, if it's something like that, divide it up however you want. There can only be one account per email. There does need to be an email right now. Same thing for tenants. The registration process for tenants looks very, very similar. You have to select a password, confirm password, confirm that you're not a robot, and go ahead and sign up. And then you'll get an email. You have to confirm that. You'll even get a two-factor authentication. It goes to a cell phone or to an email. I believe you can do that as well. And then once you get all of that in, you can sign it. So if there is already an application that's been submitted by a tenant, you need two data points for each application. This is if you're a tenant, this is if you're an advocate, this is if you're a landlord. You need the application number and you need the date of birth of the applicant. And that's how you can find the actual application. And then, you can go in and associate that with the account. Landlords do actually need the tenants to be there with them, whether that's physically in person or at least over the phone. Same if you're a CBO provider. There is so much information that's required in these applications. They take about 2 hours to do, but it's information that only the tenants will have some of this. And they may not even have all of the information. So definitely let your tenant know, let your client know, let your patient know that they need to be collecting a bunch of information ahead of time so that they have it ready, so that they have it, all good to go. Right now, you have to do the applications all in one setting. You can't go back and edit and stop and start it. You don't have to upload all of your documents at one time, but you have to do the application from start to finish all at once. So, again, if you're a landlord, you log in, you go into the landlord owner section. There's going to be an actual owner number. If you're submitting a W-9, you can go ahead. You're going to need to add the Ewrap application first, and then you can upload the documents like a W-9, like the direct deposit form. Once an application has actually been submitted, you can see all of these tabs. If you're a landlord, unit address, application number, total arrears, amount paid, stuff like that. I'm going to run through these slides a little bit quickly, but again, the two pieces of information that everybody needs: the application number and the date of birth. And then, once you put that in, whether you have to associate it, whether you're starting this from a tenant account or from a landlord account. once you type in the application number and the date of birth, the actual submit or previously submitted application will pop up, and you can associate that with the landlord account or with the tenant account. And then once you're actually uploading documents, you have to do them one at a time, whether you're uploading documents as a landlord or you're uploading documents as a tenant. There's a 4 megabyte limit. So if it's a big lease, you may have to compress a PDF or something like that. But there is a way to actually upload documents through this portal as well. And then, if you're a landlord, again, I'm running through all the landlord stuff first. But if you are a landlord, you can go ahead. You're going to need to go ahead and fill out this form showing, what the regular monthly rent was, what the amount past due was, which is a running total. So it's not, this was the arrears for April 2021. No, it's what you would put here is, here's all of the arrears that had accumulated by the end of April 2020. And then, May, so on and so forth. Obviously, this goes through December 2021. So you can ask for 3 months of future rent. So that's where this prospective rent amount comes into play. You go ahead and put what the future rent is. And again, landlords can submit an application on behalf of their tenant. And I'm going to run through what starting that process looks like. It's a process that's pretty much the same for landlords, for tenant applicants that are doing it themselves, for CBO providers. Everything is going to look like the next few slides. So once you have created an account as a landlord or as a tenant, maybe you've helped your tenant create an account. They've gone through the whole process. You'll have them sign in, and then you'll have them go to that homepage, and click on Apply Here Now. So if you want to have your tenant or your client register as a tenant, they go to nysrenthelp.otda.ny.gov. And they don't have to do it in English. They can do this in I believe there's 11 languages. They can register as a tenant, first name, last name, email, password. There is an email requirement. I know a lot of folks don't have emails, and that's a problem right now, because there is an email requirement to create an account. But once all that gets sent in, they'll get a confirmation email. They have to click on that confirmation email, and then from there, they have to answer a text that gets sent to their phone or an email that gets sent as well for a 2-factor authentication. Then they log in, then they're good to go. Make sure if you're helping out somebody with this application that they write down their email, that they write down their login information. And once they actually get an application submitted, they write down their confirmation number, make sure, all of the information is correct, make sure they don't, put in a wrong date of birth for whatever reason, because all of this information is stuff that they will need in the future. So then once you get logged in, you click on Apply Here Now, and then Start New Application. Again, you have to do it all in one shot. There may be a way to resume an application that isn't fully submitted, several weeks from now, but that is not a functionality that exists right now. So once you start the application, there are actually 11 tabs of information to go through. And so the first one asks for a lot of background information as far as who is helping out the applicant fill out the application. And so if somebody is helping them out, you select yes, I'm helping this person fill it out. You can select that you're a landlord. You can select that you're a community-based organization. You can select that you're a friend. Now, there isn't somewhere to select that you're a physician, but you know, you could select that you're a friend or a member of the community, and then you put your actual contact information, first name, last name, address, email, phone number, all of that. Then you put the applicant's information, first name, last name, date of birth, email, social security number if they have one, some demographic information, and there's even somewhere to put in an emergency contact, which can be the person who's filling out the application, or it can be someone else. You know, obviously, there's going to be folks that are applying for this that may not be their own best advocates. So maybe a family member is a good emergency contact to put in. Maybe, you know, somebody else, in case there needs to be an additional point of contact. So the second tab asks about COVID hardship. Again, you know, the idea is for this to pay off rental arrears that have accumulated during the pandemic. So this is all pandemic related. So, you know, it asks if anybody in the household has been affected by the pandemic financially. And there's two categories and one kind of quasi category about how you can show that. You can either the household that's applying can either have experienced a reduction in income or an increase in costs. And so a reduction in income can be anything from being laid off, being furloughed, having hours cut, having wages cut, having the business shut down temporarily, something like that. An increase in costs can be as simple as having to buy PPE, which, you know, I think just about everybody had to buy masks at some point, so that would literally count. Or having increased costs due to working remotely, childcare costs, costs for kids going to school remotely from home, increase in transportation costs. There's a lot of things that funeral costs, healthcare costs. There's a lot of things that that pop up as an increase in costs, and you know, a decrease in finances could also be being sick and unable to work. So if somebody had COVID and they were in the hospital, or if they had something else during the pandemic and they weren't able to work, that counts as a reduction in income. And then there's some various other questions that are going to be asked about COVID, about the household. So then going on to the third, there's also, sorry, staying on the COVID impact tab, there's also a question about if there's a case in housing court, and if the answer is yes, you know, what the index number is. You know, so this is pretty involved. It's pretty in depth, and it's stuff that you as a landlord or as a physician or as a community-based organization that, you know, maybe it's a long-term client that you've been working with. Some of this is stuff that only the tenant client will know. Some of it's stuff that only maybe other members of the household will know. So, you know, if you're a tenant, if your client has roommates, maybe they need to get together with their roommates and have the answer to all of this, especially because of the next tab, which is the household members tab, which asks for how many folks are living in the household other than the tenant that's applying. It asks for all of the information, first name, last name, date of birth, social security number if they have one, you know, various demographic information, employment information, if they filled out taxes, and you go through that for each household member. That's for adults and for children. That's for anybody in the household, so even folks who aren't on the lease. Just the whole household goes on there. And then once you do that, you put in the household income. And so you put it in for each person and you put it in for each source of income. So if the person that you're helping out with is employed, you put in what their employment income is. If they're getting child support, you put in that. You put in everything separately. If they're receiving SSI, if they're receiving unemployment benefits, you put in each of those, and you go ahead and put that in for each household member as well. So again, you got to make sure that that household has done some legwork beforehand to figure out, okay, what is everybody's income that's living in this household. So following that, you go on to the lease tab. So it asks, when did the lease begin? There does not have to be a lease for someone to qualify for ERAP. They can be, living there as a lawful tenant without a lease. But it does ask for lease information. When did the lease begin? If there isn't a lease, when did the paying of the rent start? What's the monthly rental amount? It even asks for what type of house. Is it what type of residence? Is it an apartment? Is it a mobile home? Is it a duplex? Is it a house? How many bedrooms are there? Is it a studio? I think it allows for up to 8 bedrooms or something large. Also asks for more information that you may not know, the tenant applicant may not know, but if it's rent regulated, if it's a Section 8 housing, public housing, rent controlled even, and then what's the actual status of the housing? Is it the entire units being rented from the owner? Is it being subletted? And even room rentals are allowed. So if somebody is renting a room, that's fine. If somebody's in a mobile home, if they're renting a lot, that also qualifies. So like I said, there's 11 tabs. It's a lengthy application, and this may be, I'd say this and the household income are probably the parts that take the longest. But you put in the actual arrears as well. Going back from March 2020 to June 2021, I'm sure when July rolls around, it'll be, you put in July as well. So you put in the left column, and all of these are screenshots from the website. It's a PowerPoint presentation. I'm sure not everybody is able to make out every line of this, but hopefully I'm doing a good job of explaining what is actually here. But you put the month, the rent for each month. In the left column, you put together the total running amount of arrears in the middle column. And then you put any fees in the right column. So if it's late fees, if it's something else, again, late fees are going to be waived as a condition of accepting of a landlord accepting any rental arrears. And I know we have a lot of folks with questions in the chat. We're going to have some time for Q&As at the very end, and so hopefully we'll be able to get to a lot of those questions. So again, the running rental arrears is so it's the total accumulated arrears at the end of that month. So it's not like if somebody owed $10,000 in arrears last month, and then this month they paid all of their rent except for $10. Their arrears that you would put for this month is not $10. It would be the $10,010. So following that, and you can also at the bottom ask for 1, 2, or 3 months of future rent to be paid as well. Again, arrears of 12 months can be paid going back to March 2020. and then 3 months of future rent. So, unfortunately, you can't get 15 or 16 months of arrears paid, but, one thing that makes it better is that you can get 3 months of future rent paid. So, the next tab is the utility arrears tab. It's a lot like the rental arrears tab, except it does it separately for heat, for gas, and for electric. It actually asks for the utility provider. It asks for the account number, for who is on the bill, for who is responsible for paying the arrears, and then you put in whatever the amount was for gas for each month going back to March 2020, whatever the accumulated arrears was for each month, and again, 12 months of arrears can be paid off. One thing that is a little bit difficult about this is if it's all through one company, like if somebody has their gas and their electric through Con Ed, you got to actually go into the bill and see, okay, this portion was for electric, okay, this portion was for gas. It's there's options for a bunch of different utility companies. It's not limited to Con Ed, but it does take a little bit of time that way. Also, life is a lot easier if the applicant has kept all of their utility bills going back for a while, because utility rent is something that is pretty consistent from month to month. Usually, utility bills not necessarily, but you work with what you have. So the 8th of the 11 tabs asks for information as far as other rental assistance programs that have been applied to. There were previous rental assistance programs before ERAP. There's also various subsidies, a lot of which are actually on hold right now as far as being approved. Because the idea is you apply for ERAP first, and then you try to apply for something like city FEPS or FEPS or something like that afterwards. So there is somewhere, however, on this tab to answer questions about if the applicant has applied for any of these other programs to try to cover back rent. So then following that, there's a communications preferences tab. So if there are problems with the application, at least in theory, someone from the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance who's reviewing the application should reach out to the tenant. Then there's options to do it via email, via text message, or via regular mail. And you can select what language is best for that. And there's even an option to do it in an alternative format, whether that's large page, large font, whether that's Braille, whether that's actually read out on a CD. Now, I should mention that the actual application that I ran through is available in, I believe, 11 different languages, but you have to start the application in whatever language you want to do it in.
Hello?
I would just ask that everyone mute themselves. But okay, so going to the final real tab is the Applicant Certification tab. And it's this whole long paragraph that the tenant has to certify upon penalty of perjury that all of the information is accurate and that they understand that they can actually, because this is money that is going through this treasury, is going through various state agencies, is stuff that there's a desire to make sure there's no double dipping, no instances where rent has already been paid by a different program, by a different agency. There's going to be a whole lot of behind the scenes work that various agencies are doing as far as checking databases to see, you know, what income folks are making, what other benefits have been paid out. So if for no other reason, you're going to need to have the tenant applicant there to read this and to certify that it's true upon penalty of perjury. And they can do that electronically. They can just click yes and then type their name. And so then once all of that happens, you'll see a little green thing pop up. It may actually pop up before you get to this point, but that will be a confirmation number or the application number. And you need to make sure that you save it. You need to make sure that your client, your patient, your tenant saves that, because that's the application number and that's what you need to get in to check the status of it or to upload documents to it. You need the application number and the tenant's date of birth. And so you can go in, sign in with that tenant's account. They put in the application number, they put in the date of birth, and then they can upload documents. Again, it has to be one by one. There's a list of different documents that are required, which we went over earlier in the presentation. A lease is a big one. A rent breakdown is a big one. Identifying information, income information. All of those have to be uploaded one by one. There's a 4 megabyte limit, and it has to be a certain file format. So then, you know, once all of that's in, the idea is that it'll take 4 to 6 weeks for these applications to be processed. But in the meantime, you can check the application status. You're going to need the application number and the date of birth to do that. You can go to this website, nysrenthelp.otda.ny.gov. If you're doing it in English, /en/tools/check application status, and that'll bring you to the check application status. Each adult household member right now has to verify that their information is correct. They have to have the application number, and then they'll put in their own first name and their own date of birth. That may be something that changes in the future, but right now it's a requirement. And so again, you know, if there are any questions as far as how to do the Ewrap application, I know, you know, it's long, it's extensive. There's you know, a lot of questions that will be coming up as you do it. You can call this hotline 1-844-NY1-RENT. That is 1-844-691-7368. And that is the statewide hotline that's run by the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance. It's staffed Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Their goal right now is to not have wait times be any more than 2 minutes. Various people are reporting various things as far as that goes, but that is who you reach out to if you have any questions. And then I know we're a little bit pressed for time, but I do have some quick eligibility questions that I'll run through. Probably not going to get through all of them, but the question 1 is just an example. Somehow your patient is Aaron Judge. Congratulations. Aaron Judge made $10 million last year, give or take. Let's say, you know, he spent all of his money on Dogecoin and he stopped paying his rent because he heard that there's money coming from the government that's going to pay everybody's rent. Is Mr. Judge eligible for ERAP? He literally has no money left to pay his rent, but he made $10 million. No, he's not eligible because, like I said, there is that AMI requirement, 80% or below AMI to be eligible. So, you know, you could have somebody come in that very much needs help with paying rental arrears, but they have to be below 80% of the AMI on a household level. Sample problem number 2, Maria is a single adult undocumented immigrant who is an essential worker, worked all the way through the pandemic, but had her hours cut and lost income as a result. Her annual pay for 2020 was $15,000, but she's always been paid in cash. She has an active non-payment eviction case due to arrears. Does she qualify for ERAP? So that is a whole lot of information right there, but what I wanted to touch on is this is someone who's undocumented, who never lost their job. Do they qualify for ERAP? Yes, they do, because ERAP is immigration status blind. So in this particular instance, this person would qualify and would actually be at the very top of the priority list for the first 30 days. Like I said, through the end of June, there's these 4 tiers for folks who will be given priority as far as their applications. And so that's folks who are below 50% AMI and have one of the 7 risk factors that bumps someone up to the top category. Having an open eviction case is one of those risk factors. Now, if somebody was paid in cash, they may not have the best records as far as their income, as far as, tax records, pay stubs, something like that. So this is somewhere where she may have to do what's called a self-attestation for her income. I would say as far as a self-attestation, unless you know how to do this from somewhere else or your tenant knows how to do this from somewhere else, maybe give the hotline a call to see what their thoughts are on a self-attestation, because it is a little involved. It's an actual document that the tenant would have to draft up. So then I'm gonna wrap up here. Somebody lost a job before 2020, and would they still qualify for ERAP if they haven't had any income since before the pandemic started? They might, and that's where increase in costs comes into play. That's something where you go ahead and have them submit the application anyway. OTDA can approve it or reject it. And then we're gonna jump over the last question. And there are various links available. There's actually some YouTube videos on OTDA's website as well. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Bonnie.
Thank you so much, Jordan. That was really informative, and I'm very impressed how much you have mastered this program in such a short amount of time. So thank you so much. There's tons of questions, but right now we're going to hand it right off to Thomas Abbott from HPD, who's going to talk about some other rental assistance capital improvements programs through HPD for landlords. And Thomas has to jump off at 2:30, so we're going to go ahead and have questions specifically for him around this HPD presentation immediately after his presentation, and then we'll save questions for Jordan for afterwards. Okay, so with that, I will hand it off to Thomas.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining. So I think you've heard a lot about the ERAP program, and I think that can go a long way towards sort of helping you guys out with financial stability. I think HPD has a lot of programs that are actually available that are also potentially helpful and can be sort of thought about in conjunction with ERAP. Could we go to the next slide? Am I able to advance? Excellent. So just a brief sort of agenda for what we're going to be talking about. Introductions. My name is Thomas Abbott. I'm a senior project manager at HPD in preservation finance. So the sort of division that manages loans and tax exemptions for existing buildings, for rehabilitation, and for things of that nature. So I'm going to run through the financing options at sort of a high level. I'll talk about how those contribute to HPD's goal of keeping New York City affordable. I'll mention a pair of case studies that should sort of illustrate the way that these things play out in the real world, or sort of what the potential cases are. I'll mention how you can apply, and then I think we'll have a little bit of time for question and answer. Can we go to the next slide? Great. So if you are the owner of a 1 to 4 family owner-occupied home, then the best option for you is a program that's run by HPD in conjunction with our partner, the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. That program is called Home Fix. What this does is it pairs financial assistance for repairs alongside some individualized intensive technical assistance to help you make the repairs that you need to make in the building. So they're affordable, low or no interest loans. The maximum loan for a single family home is $60,000 for sort of repair work. And then that goes up by $30,000 for each additional unit. I'm sure you've heard a decent amount about the area median income today as sort of a way of calculating tenant income. In this case, a homeowner to be eligible for this program would have to make less than 165% of the area median income. Can we go to the next slide? Great. We also have a whole suite of loan programs for rehabilitation work in sort of larger multifamily properties. And these are intended to, help owners who are facing financial or physical instability with their buildings, and to sort of look holistically at the issues they're facing and to sort of target a financing package that makes sense to get them in the right place. So the first of these is a lead hazard reduction in healthy homes. So this is a federally funded, this is actually our only grant program. All the rest of them are going to be loans. And this is for either single or multifamily buildings that are experiencing lead issues. So have received lead violations from HPD, have in some way discovered that there is lead in the building. In order to be eligible, the building has to be occupied by at least some children under age 6, as they're particularly susceptible to lead. And it can be combined with other HPD financing. So grants here average about $8,000 per unit, and are targeted specifically at that lead abatement work, at sort of assessing and dealing with it. There's the Housing Rehabilitation Loan Program. So these next two are going to be moderate rehabilitation loan programs. So if you need major systems replacement work, like a roof replacement, maybe the windows have to be replaced, you're dealing with facade issues, you have to replace the boiler. These are all good use cases for this program. And generally they're for buildings, the HPD would be the only lender. So they're for buildings that have no or limited ability to support private financing. So if you're to go out in the market and you're going to try to get a loan to deal with whatever you need to deal with, this is for folks who might have a little trouble finding a bank who would be willing to lend. The next one is the Green Housing Preservation Program. It shares a lot of similarities with the one I've just mentioned, except it's targeted generally at smaller buildings under 50,000 square feet, which equates to about 50 units. And it's also targeted more directly at energy efficiency and water conservation work in buildings. So the idea is not only are we fixing the building up, we're also thinking about like a really longer term capital plan for getting utility costs down, for making the building more energy efficient and climate friendly. Next slide, great. So as I mentioned, the previous ones were HPD only loan programs. There's also, if the sort of needs that the building is facing are greater, if you need a more substantial rehabilitation, if you have a number of vacant units that are in really bad shape, or if there's structural issues or things like that, then we would direct you towards the participation loan program. The way that this one works is you go out and you approach one of our participating lenders, you see how much they're willing to lend to you, and then HPD lends to fill the gap between what needs to happen in the building and what those private banks are willing to support. Housing Preservation Opportunities Program. So this is for buildings that are in really good shape, but are maybe facing financial issues and have high property taxes. So this is a property tax exemption only program. So HPD is not lending, instead we're offering this property tax exemption as part of that process. Finally, there's the Qualified Buyers List, which is a list that HPD maintains. If you're interested in selling your property, these are a list of for-profit or nonprofit organizations that we have vetted and trust to keep the property affordable and in good shape for future tenants. Normally, I would take this time to go in a bit more detail on the loan programs. I think for the sake of time, I just want to highlight some factors that are sort of common across them. So in all cases, if we're lending for rehabilitation, the loan size will be based on the scope of work. And that's established in conjunction with HPD. We work with you to assess building conditions and sort of figure out what needs to happen as part of the construction process. All of these loans are low interest, so the maximum you're going to get is 3%. And they're all structured to ensure building owner financial viability and stability. So we're not trying to put you in a hard spot. if you are willing to, if you want to come work with us, then we're going to make sure that the loan package makes sense and doesn't cause financial instability. Loans are a 30-year term. I mentioned the sort of gap financing piece. They're subject to capital eligibility guidelines. So generally, we're mostly restricted to building systems work rather than sort of like new floors in apartments or things within an apartment that only benefit one particular tenant. They require HPD monitoring of the construction process, and they require what's called a regulatory agreement, which is something I'll touch on in just a second. Go ahead. Yeah, so just touching on the qualified buyers list again, you can see, I guess this is sort of repetitive, we can move on. So any of these loan programs, and also I mentioned the Housing Preservation Opportunity Program, can be sort of accompanied by property tax abatements and exemptions. There's two main ones of these. The first is the Article 11 tax exemption, which is generally a very deep tax benefit that has to get voted on by the City Council. So that's something HPD would work with you on. And it's available only to properties that are owned by housing development fund corporations, which is a bit too complex to get into within the time we have. It's a specific legal vehicle. If it's something you're interested in doing, then absolutely feel free to reach out to HPD or talk to a lawyer about it, and they can talk you through it. There's a J51 exemption and abatement. This is quote unquote as of right, which means that it's, doesn't have to get voted on or isn't subject to sort of these same eligibility guidelines. And that tax abatement is based on the scope of work. So if you're doing work in the building, you can apply for a J51. And the more work you're doing, the deeper the tax benefits would be. So the regulatory agreement. So this is something that accompanies essentially all of our loans and tax exemptions. The Article 11 tax exemption is also included here. This is something that you would sign at loan closing that would generally run for the term of the loan. And it puts in place regulation on the property. So I've highlighted sort of the big pieces of that here on this slide. Rent and income limitations for future residents. So incoming, if the tenant leaves, incoming tenants would have to sort of meet these income guidelines, and there would be a maximum rent ceiling. All units must be rent stabilized. So if they're not beforehand, then you would have to register them with rent stabilization when we start off. There's a minimum term of 15 years, but almost all of them are longer than that, generally 30 to 40. We require third-party property management, contribution to operating and capital reserves, and energy benchmarking, which just means you're tracking your utility usage. Keep going. I'm going to skip over these since I think we've talked, you probably have talked a decent amount about the area median income. I think this is just to give you a sense of, what's entailed with thinking about income and rent restrictions. They're based on the area median income. Oh, this is odd. These pictures are covering it up. I'm not sure what happened there. We can go back. I'll just talk it through. So yeah, so this is our first case study of a loan program. So this was for a 6-unit building in East New York. The owner had received some lead violations and was dealing with lead in the building. So they approached HPD and we provided this forgivable loan, so with no payments, for just over $100,000 to sort of abate that lead work. And you can see some photos sort of what the type of work that was done was. You can go ahead. Next, so this is a loan we closed through our Green Housing Preservation Program. 6-unit building in Bed-Stuy. They were facing high utility bills and they had some repairs that needed to be done within the building. So we provided this a little bit more than a $400,000 low interest loan to replace the boiler, the roof, windows, and implemented other sort of green measures. And the owner was projected to save 43% as compared to a baseline on their utility bills. And then you can just see here where the rents were and where we restricted them. We can go ahead. Yeah, so I know that was sort of a whirlwind. I threw a lot of information at you, but here's sort of some ways that you can apply, and I think we can probably distribute this presentation so that these links, you can refer back to this. If you're interested in any of those loan programs, if you want to learn more, if there's any of that, then you can reach out and it's sort of the application documentation is there, the email to send it to is there. You can go to the next slide. And here's some other links to sort of outreach and education. And yeah, I mean, I think that's it for my presentation. I think we can either leave that up or just return to the main screen so I can see folks if they have questions.
Great, thank you so much, Thomas. We have a question in the chat. How do you apply for the qualified buyers list?
So I think that is a rolling request for qualification. I can drop the contact information for that. I'm not sure we're accepting new folks for that as of now. I think that list may be static at the moment. But after I go through the other questions, I can take a look and try and follow up with you.
Great, thanks. And Jordan, you can go ahead and stop the screen share now, and we can just do, since we're now solidly in the Q&A, we can see each other. Thank you so much. Any other questions for Thomas? And feel free, you can either put it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. I'll give you a minute. We will, just as another reminder, some people have asked, we are going to share all of the slides as well as a recording of this training with everyone. So you will have access to all the helpful links and information that was provided and follow up.
Okay.
I think that might be it. Thank you so much, Thomas. And yeah, you'll have the contact information to follow up if you have any questions later on. Not, then we will get to the questions that were coming in earlier. I'm just going to scroll the top. Let's see. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. All right, let me just bring you back, Jordan. Just a second. Okay, great. Okay, let's see. First question is, going back to that. I'm just going to start at the beginning and we're going to try to work our way through. Okay. I don't understand that question. Sorry, there's a lot of chat activity, folks. Let me just get caught up. Okay, is there a form for the landlord to complete to submit the bank information?
So, there is somewhere for landlords to upload documents. So, if the landlord wants to upload a document about banking information, they can certainly do that. I'm not sure that there's a fillable form or anything like that to just type it in, but once you have created your landlord account, you can go ahead and upload both your W-9 and whatever banking account information, tracking number, all of that.
What about if they have no issues with rent but do have utilities?
So there's a requirement for at least some rental arrears in order to apply for utility arrears. So that can literally be $1, that can be 1 month. The pandemic isn't over yet, so there isn't actually an end date on when the rental arrears can be. It just has to be sometime after March 13th, 2020.
So it might be advisable to, I don't know if I should say this, to not pay part of the rent and to show that there's a rent burden in order to be able to also to get that rent covered and as well as the utilities.
That could be an option. Again, it's no idea how long this money from the ERAP program is going to be available or how long it's going to take or if that's going to raise other issues, but that is one way to get utility arrears, to qualify for the utility arrears.
Someone expressed they've already had 2 problems with landlords. First one outright refused to participate. The second is refusing to respond online and refusing to provide an email address when the state said that they needed that.
So from just a good best practices, if you're a tenant, try to make sure that all of that happens in writing. So if you're texting your landlord, if you're texting your whoever you're in contact with, and they say we won't provide it, just make sure that that's in writing. And like I said, that is something where if landlords refuse the rent and it's approved, if it comes up in housing court later, it will be deemed that the landlord has waived that the rent for that period. So if you've emailed your landlord and you said, I applied for the ERAP program to pay off these 12 months of rental arrears, and you get nothing, you get crickets, or you get a actual refusal, congratulations on your 12 months of free rent. Now, obviously, you have to have a paper trail for that, or you have to win that in court later. But yes.
So essentially, if your landlord refuses to participate, it's not that your application will still be approved and the money will be paid. It's just that if the landlord does bring you to housing court, they won't have a case against you because they refused to collect those rental arrears because they refused to participate.
So, each individual case will probably be different, but it is going to be a defense, at least for those months' rent. Now, if you owe rent for other months, then the other months that defense doesn't apply
to. Can working people apply for the benefit?
Yes. So you don't have to be unemployed. You just have to be below the 80% AMI. Check what that is for the household AMI. So it amounts just you. If it's you and your family of 5, it's a higher amount. But there are plenty of folks who are employed. I've done applications for folks who are employed. You don't have to be unemployed.
This is a question from a landlord or a property owner. How can you collect rent owed prior to March 2020? What if you had a case that was put on hold due to COVID?
So for rent before March 2020, the ERAP program will not apply to that. While the application is pending, that case will be on hold. But as far as getting pre-COVID rental arrears paid off, there's a variety of other avenues to get that done. Some, it depends on how that could happen, but ERAP can do post March 2020. There's probably going to be some folks that end up applying for ERAP and get approved for ERAP, and then maybe they need to apply for a one-shot deal or something like that to pay off their arrears. But every individual instance is different. But ERAP is just post March 13th, 2020.
So, in kind of a follow-up to that, in the application, when they're having to list the arrears that are owed, can they or should they put arrears that were owed prior to March 2020, or does that not, or should they not do that?
So I would say that it's a good idea just to put all of the arrears. They can see what the rental amount for March 2020 was. So if the rent was $2,000 for March 2020, and at the end of and the rental arrears that pop up first on the screen are $20,000. Well, you know that obviously some of that is pre-March 2020.
Okay. Since you had mentioned a one-shot deal, somebody had asked what the difference was between this program, the ERAP, and a one-shot deal. And then there was another, while you're answering that, I'm going to look, there's a second one-shot deal question I'm going to look for.
So one-shot deals are actually loans that have to be paid back eventually. It's a completely different program. ERAP is actually not a loan. ERAP is just a government grant. Basically, it's not free money. It's taxpayer funded money, but it's money that was actually allocated by the federal government, a big portion of it, to pay off COVID rental arrears. So there's ERAP all over. Every place does it differently, but you know, Philly has an ERAP, Houston has an ERAP, New York has an ERAP. And it's a grant that does not have to be paid back. So you know, especially if you're a tenant or if you're a landlord, ERAP is a better option to start with right now, because if somebody is applying for a one-shot deal, well, that has to be paid back in the future. That may affect somebody's ability to pay rent in the future. This is just a grant of money. And also one-shot deals, everybody's kind of waiting on ERAP before anything gets approved for one-shot deals or for city FEPs or for FEPs or for any of those subsidies, because the idea is apply to ERAP first.
And that answers kind of the other question I was asked about, which is preferable. So do NYCHA apartment tenants qualify for the program?
So the answer is yes, but NYCHA is a little bit of a unique situation, because a lot of cases where somebody is in NYCHA, part of their rent is being subsidized. So definitely for the first 30 days, if somebody is in NYCHA and is not paying, 30% of their income on rent, is not paying more than 30% of their gross income on rent, they would be bumped down to a lower priority. There is the thinking that a lot of the rent is subsidized if it's in NYCHA. So it really comes down to the individual applicant, the individual situation, and it's something where you're going to need to have all of your documents ready to submit, both for your income, for whatever you're paying for your NYCHA apartment, and just be able to show that to somebody.
This is a question for a CBO that rents a building to run supportive housing, and they have residents that have a portion of their income that they have to pay towards rent. Is the CBO eligible to apply without a W-9?
So if you're applying as a landlord, you do need to have a W-9. If you're going to get paid, you need to provide the banking information. Now, if you're helping out a tenant apply, then you can help out the tenant apply as a CBO. You can help out the tenant apply as a landlord, but this is a little bit of a trickier situation.
So essentially, because they don't own the building, but the rent is owed to them. So they pay the building owner, the CBO pays the building owner, but the tenant pays a portion of their income to the CBO. So it's the CBO that is actually owed the rent.
Right. So in that instance, I think the best thing to do is to call the hotline first, but and explain that you are supportive housing. You do have this relationship where you're a landlord, but you're not the traditional landlord. But getting around the W-9 requirement is a little bit tricky. And again, it's relatively early in the process, so there may be more guidance that we're given from OTDA as far as how to deal with that.
I think it's fairly common for even CBOs to have a W-9. I mean, I know we have a W-9 even though we're not landlords, so your organization may have one. So maybe something to look into. I have a client in supportive housing who has arrears of almost $60,000. He's on the verge of eviction. Can he receive funds?
So the short answer is yes. The long answer is it will probably chip into that 60,000, but I would imagine that it's not gonna erase the whole 60,000. So, ERAP will pay 12 months of rental arrears and 3 months of future rent. If you're at 60,000, I would imagine that you're going back, maybe 3 years, maybe further. But yes, apply for ERAP, but don't.
There's not like there's some programs that if you're like over a certain point, like they won't, they kind of won't help you. So there's not like a maximum amount that you can be in arrears. There's just only so much in time period that ERAP itself will cover it.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
If you are applying for the ERAP, do the tenant have to have the landlord's information as well, or do you just apply without their W-2 and they'll, you just need your documents and then they'll contact the landlord?
So you need to contact the landlord if you've applied, just because they need the application number and they need your date of birth. But it's on the landlord to upload the W-9, the bank information. Now, if you have a good relationship with your landlord, or if you have enough of a relationship with your landlord that they will work with you to get, a year's worth of money coming to them, let them know you're applying, depending on your situation, and let them know to be on the lookout for a call. You do, when you are putting in the application, you do need to put in your landlord's phone number and an email, and just some contact information so the folks from OTDA can reach out to them. But other than that, you don't have to do anything beyond that. But OTDA is not going to know. There isn't really a database of landlords that they're going to say, oh, this person lives here. Let's look up who their landlord is. Let's look up how to contact them. You do actually have to provide that information.
Is it possible to register as individual service providers if we want to help people apply in our organization? Or do we have to send people to the official service organizations that have big waiting lists? We work with a lot of elderly and disabled people who don't really use email.
So if you are a CBO, reach out to the hotline. This may take a little while, but there may be a way for you to set up an account as a CBO. You don't have to be an approved on the list of folks that are, the quote unquote approved application assistance providers to help out. You can be, a CBO and helping out. But as far as getting an individual CBO email set up, that's a process that I'm not really familiar with. I think you probably, your best bet is to reach out to OTDA on that.
And I have one more. Can I ask you, is this going to end the end of the month?
No. So the priority period for the 4 different priority groups ends at the end of the month, but this ERAP program is going to be continuing on for several months. In theory, into December and potentially into next year. In actuality, funds will probably run out long before then. So then, once that happens, I'm sure there's going to be a reevaluation of what's going to happen with ERAP, but it does not end at the end of the month.
If a person is renting a room who owes rent and is not on the lease, will that person qualify to have the back rent paid for the unpaid rent notarized by the person who's renting them the room?
So Quite possibly. So you can be in a room rental and qualify for ERAP. If you are the landlord, or if you're renting out the room, it would be helpful for your sake and for actually doing the application to come up with a rent ledger, which maybe you don't already have that. And that shows, going back to at least March 2020, but before that, here's what was owed for each month, here's what was paid for each month, here's the arrears. And if you wanted, if there isn't necessarily a lease, but there's some sort of agreement, if it's written, have that to upload as well. If there isn't any written agreement, then you can do a landlord certification and say, this person has been renting a room from me since whenever it started. Here's what the monthly amount is. Here's what the arrears are. And coming up with that rent ledger is even better. And if you want to get it notarized, great.
Are tenants who are required to pay 30% of their income eligible for the first priority if they meet one of the criteria? For example, veteran or pending eviction who has a Section 8 voucher.
So if you are eligible for ERAP and you have below 50% AMI, and you have one of those risk categories, then you do get bumped up to the top priority. Now, if your entire portion is being paid by a program, that's different. If you have a portion, then we'll see how that ends up working in practice. But in theory, that person should be bumped up to the top of the priority list for the first 30 days.
Is there a way to check to see if the owner put in the documents that are needed? I believe that's
so kind of. And for a submitted application, if after you've associated with your account as a tenant or with your account as a landlord, there's a tab where you can see documents submitted. Unfortunately, you can't actually click on it and open up and see what the actual document was. It just shows a confirmation number, an upload date, and not even the name of the document, the category of the document. So hopefully, looking at that will give you an idea, but this might be something where you're better served calling the hotline and having them look at it and having them tell you.
And I know I've seen some questions around like technical issues with passcodes and codes. If we can get to those questions, great, but there are a lot of questions and it seems like those might be better served by the hotline. So I'm just gonna focus on some of the more programmatic ones or eligibility ones. So for someone who owes utilities, is it necessary to put the amount for all the months, or is it okay if at the moment you only have the current balance owed? Will not putting the amount for every month make them ineligible?
I do not have a full answer for that. I wish I did. In theory, if you just have the most recent amount and you have the arrears, OTDA can call the utility. OTDA can have them look it up from the actual account number. You do have to put in the account number. In practice, is only having the amount for 1 month and then just having the arrears that's accumulated since you have no idea when going to be a problem. We'll find out. It's 4 to 6 weeks is the target time to process these applications, and it's been 3 weeks right now. So you might get a request for additional information. The tenant might get a request for additional information. If they can reach out to the utility company themselves and get PDFs of those bills or get a breakdown from the utility, then that'll make life easier. But I don't have a full answer to that.
Okay, here, what are the income limits for ERAP applicants who worked but had increased expenses related to working during the pandemic?
So yeah, if you work, you're eligible as long as you are below the 80% AMI and you have the other eligibility criteria, like owing rental arrears. Increased costs is something that that counts as being financially impacted by COVID-19.
So like having to get childcare because, yeah, okay. All right. Let's see. Oh, sorry, there's one about, will applying for other rental assistance programs make you ineligible for this one?
So that is a question that has, that's a loaded question. So if you applied for something else and it paid off all your rent and you don't owe any rent, then you will be ineligible. If you applied for something and it's pending and after you submit your application for this, surprise, everything gets approved for the other application, then that's something where you'll need to go in, call the hotline, let them know that it got approved, let them know that it got paid. But just having submitted an application, no. Will it slow things down? I'm not sure because we don't know everything that's going to be happening behind the scenes, but the various agencies will be, at least in theory, in communication with each other.
What is possible around providers applying on behalf of their clients who are unresponsive or extremely difficult to be in touch with? Can we create an email and log in on their behalf and have them sign an attestation form that we are doing this application form on their behalf?
So that is something that is up to you as an organization. That's something that, you know, if your client is willing to give you access to an account that they create, that to their account, and you get it in writing, you know, I'm not going to give legal advice on that, but you know, you can certainly assist clients, and you know, whatever the best means to do that is something that you know, you'll have to take into consideration whatever ethical considerations you typically would.
I completed applications on behalf of my clients. Should I still register them for an account?
Yes. It's not a requirement, so you know, you're not required to, but if they end up needing to upload any documentation later, it's going to be a lot harder for them to do that without having an account and having that application associated with their account. So I would say just best practices, have every applicant have an account.
Sorry, I'm just answering a question in the chat too. Okay. Are you allowed one landlord account per agency or per facility within the agency?
So I believe it's one landlord account per email. So if you want to structure it where, you know, the whole agency has one email and you have everything just tied to that, or if you want to do it, you know, where it's different for each facility, I think that's an organizational decision. Now, does that make things tougher if you have, you know, one email, one account for your whole agency, and the individual facilities have different W-9s and different information that you're going to need to upload? Maybe. So maybe that's something to take into consideration. But I think the only limit as far as ERAP accounts for landlords is that there can only be one per email.
For tenants with a housing subsidy and a one-year lease first signed in 2019, so they have signed a new lease in 2020, should we answer the question when the lease started or when benefits started with the date they moved in or the date of the most recent, this says loan, but I'm wondering if it means lease?
So yeah, there's obviously some issues where you have multiple leases. You should try to get copies of both leases and upload them. And then when it asks for the rental amount, I mean, just on the tab where it puts in the arrears amount and the rental amount, put in whatever the accurate rental amount was for each individual month, and whatever the arrears were for each month. I think there is a question that asks, when did the person move in or when did the lease start? You could probably go with the earliest date. I don't know if there would be a particular problem if you put the date that the most recent lease started. Just make sure that you put in the accurate rental amounts for each month. And if you can upload both leases, great.
I may need to follow up with the person who asked this question for some more information, but it says, what if you had a holdover with the tenant from November 2019?
So if there does not have to be a current lease. It goes off, what the oldest lease was. Yeah, as far as that, you put in what the monthly rental amount was. I would assume that you probably have a rent breakdown or a rent ledger that you've been keeping even since 2019. So that is what you go off of. Now, if you if there's any other issues that come up, that's something that you want to make sure that you and the tenant are on the same page as far as the rental amount.
Some questions about utilities. So my client only put the recent bill for May, but not for the other months. How do we fix that, or is it needed?
So call the hotline on that one, because there could be a lot of different things going on there. It could be that the whole arrears wasn't put in, or it could just be the arrears was put in and then just the amount for the month of May was put in. If they can get a more recent utility breakdown from their utility that has, here's everything that was going back all of these months, that's great. But this one's going to involve a hotline call.
Okay. Another utility question. Where did it go? If the utilities are under a different name, example, a spouse, but the lease is under your name and the spouse, an ex-wife, sorry, but the lease is under your name and the ex-wife doesn't live there, can you still be eligible? Do you need a letter of divorce?
So this is a fairly complicated situation, but there is somewhere on the utility arrears tab to put in whoever the utility's name is in. Now, you're going to have to put in the household members, and that's going to have to be accurate and current. So if the person whose name is on the utility bill is no longer a household member, that may be an issue. I'm not sure. But, hopefully you're still getting the utility bills. Hopefully you can, figure out what the account number is and what the actual amounts are and put all of that in there. Put in the most accurate information. If you want to upload a certificate of divorce, you can. You're definitely not required to. There may be a question as far as why is this person's name on the utilities if they're not a member of the household, and you may be asked for additional documents. I don't know, but that's something where you just put the most accurate information in, And maybe you want to look into getting the utilities switched over to somebody that currently lives there. That's a different situation though.
If the ownership document has been submitted under the landlord account, does it also have to be submitted to each application added to the owner account?
So that's a good question, and I think just in the interests of making everything easier, I would, as far as making sure there's no delay in the approval, I would say yes. But I think this is also a hotline question. And if you call that hotline and you dial extension 2, those are folks that are set up to speak directly to landlords. So you do, when you do have an ownership account, you do have your own unique owner code. So that may be something where they're able to see that there's already some documents pre-uploaded and they can access that. But also the individual folks that are reviewing these applications, they're people, they make mistakes. So you may want to make it easier for them to find things as well.
Can you explain the arrears entries in the application? When they are entered the way that was described, the total is the sum of all of the numbers entered in the arrears field, not a running total.
Yeah, so so what I meant by running total is that you put up whatever the total arrears was at the end of the month. So you don't just put up, this is the amount that was unpaid from the rent for this month. You put up, this is the amount that is the total arrears that are owed at the end of January 2021. And then the next one for February 2021 is not going to be the unpaid portion of rent for February 2021. It's going to be the total arrears that have accumulated at the end of February 2021. And that could go up, it could go down if somebody's been making partial payments. It's not going to necessarily just be at one more month's rent added to it. It's going to be, what was it at the end of that?
So I think they were saying when they did that, though, it just kept adding all of those totals together, and it came up with something around like $65,000 in arrears, but that was much more than what the actual arrears were. So it was like adding together what the arrears were in January and what they were in February.
So if you have so if you're looking at total arrears and you're putting a running total for each of them, you don't add what the total was for each month to your total arrears, or then you would just get a much higher number.
Mm-hmm.
But the running total is, the document asks for what was the total arrears at the end of this month? What was the total arrears at the end of this month? What was the total arrears at the end of this month? There is actually not anywhere, I believe, that asks for what the total arrears were. But if you're having, there are also a lot of glitches in the website. So if you're seeing something where you're getting a total arrears that's generated that's way off, call the hotline, tell them what's going on with that, and see if they can troubleshoot.
You all should see a little window that popped up for a poll to evaluate the session. We really appreciate if you can fill that out and let us know if this was helpful to you. And I'm just going to keep plugging away with questions. We've got about 9 minutes left. If someone has 30% rent but not Section 8, are they eligible?
I would say yes, because the eligibility is there isn't a requirement to be in Section 8 to be eligible for ERAP.
If someone was admitted to a skilled care facility and no longer is receiving their source of income, can the landlord apply for ERAP to cover rental arrears?
So, if there is, I would imagine that there's additional considerations when it comes to skilled care facilities, as far as what is actually rent and what is potentially other costs. But if there is, you know, some sort of rental agreement, if you can do a rent breakdown, if you can do stuff like that, I mean, it is a landlord-tenant relationship. And if it's arrears that have accumulated since March 13th, 2020, and the person qualifies for ERAP based on all the eligibility factors we went over earlier, I would say go ahead and apply. Is it going to be something where the person reviewing the application has alarm bells going off? Maybe. So you might need to call in the hotline on that one and just see if there's any additional guidance that they have. But you know, just from that question, it sounds like they would probably qualify for ERAP.
Where can you find the breakdown of AMI by location?
Yes, so one moment.
We can share that link in our follow-up too with the recording. And I think there was a question about when we can get that recording out. We'll need to download and edit it a bit, but I think that we can probably get it out to you later this week, along with the slides. All right, I'm going
and
to.
And then I can even put this in the chat.
Oh, that'd be great.
Is the 80% AMI, and I believe there's a 50% one that we have a link to as well.
Again, there's a question about cutoff date for applications. I think you had already answered this, but maybe we can reiterate.
Yeah, as of right now, there isn't a cutoff date, at least that's been set in stone. I mean, the program is going to end. It's not going to be funded forever, but I believe the cutoff date is, right now, the idea is sometime in the winter. But, you know, I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be a problem where, you know, there's no money left before a problem of there being a cutoff date.
All right. I'm going to get to, since we have some time, there were questions about okay, I filled out this ERAP application for my client, and after a confirmation code was received, then I attempted to verify this code with his user ID of his account, and this confirmation code was not found. I wanted to check my client's status. I attempted to contact the ERAP phone number that is located in the application. No one answers at the moment. What should I do?
So if you have the confirmation code, one really annoying problem is that you can create a tenant account, and then you can be signed into the tenant account, and then you can start the application, you can submit the application, and once you're done, you sign out and you sign back in to the tenant account, and no application pops up. And that's because you have to actually go back in with the confirmation code and the date of birth, with the application number and the date of birth, and associate that application with the account. So that's one issue. Another issue is that if you got a confirmation code, but it was for uploading a document and not for submitting the application, each document has its own individual confirmation code. So if that's something that popped up and you were using that, it wouldn't pull up an application. And then the third is there's just a ton of glitches that pop up with this. So, you know, it's frustrating, but call the hotline. I think there were a lot of issues with folks getting through to the hotline when in the early days of the ERAP program, but some of them have been resolved. I'm sure not all of them have been resolved, but in theory, you should be able to call now and somebody should be at least picking up in about 2 minutes. That's the goal. Is that happening? Maybe.
Do we need a password from the ERAP team to start the process?
No.
What if someone was approved for a one-shot deal in earlier months and they fell behind on rent again? Would they still qualify for ERAP?
Yes. Now there are a bunch of questions about has any rent been paid by some program. So you're going to want to get a very up-to-date breakdown that shows all of the payments from the one-shot deal, and you know, that should have whatever amount that is taken out of the arrears. You know, make sure it's accurate. But you can still get ERAP even if you've gotten a one-shot deal at some point during the pandemic, or, you know, at some point period.
Okay, I'm just gonna pull this up real quick. So again, one last request to please, there's a link in the chat box for an open-ended survey around what any other feedback on this session, as well as other training needs that you have. So please let us know. We have an event coming up on Monday about regional health information organizations for executive, legal, and IT staff. So if you're interested in learning about that, the registration link is in the chat as well. Okay, I'm gonna ask, let's see, I'm gonna use every single minute that we have. So what are the steps in applying on behalf of my client? Do you create the landlord first and then create one for the client? I'm assuming this is maybe like a supportive housing provider.
So if you are a landlord, you're required to create a landlord account. So, you know, go ahead and do that, just period. You know, once that happens, you can start an application on your tenant's behalf. Or, you know, in theory, you could just have them create their own account, and you could sit there with them and walk through it and just click that you're the person assisting, but that you're also a landlord. There's a couple ways to do it. But I would say just the important thing is to make sure that you have an account as a landlord, make sure your tenant has an account as a tenant, and make sure once the application's actually submitted, you associate the application with both the landlord account and the tenant account.
Okay, with regard to income for those employed, is it gross or net income that needs to be entered for the income part?
So that is gross income.
All right, I think we got them all. I'm sorry if I missed your question. I apologize. This was a very busy chat box, so please feel free to let us know, follow up if you have any follow-up questions about this. We will be sending the slides, the recording, and out to you. Thank you so much. Thank you for being interested in this program and helping the people that you work with, your clients, your tenants, your patients, get this assistance. Thank you so much to Jordan for providing this really critical information and for all the work. I know that you are, you know, are probably struggling a lot in this crazy time. So thank you for carving out some time to go over this with us. We really, really appreciate it. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.